A man is lying flat in a beet field in Lorraine in the autumn of 1944, and he cannot lift his head. He is a German infantryman, and a few minutes ago he was moving with his squad toward a tree line. Now 2 of them are down, and the rest are pressed into the dirt. And the strange thing, the thing that does not make sense to him, is that he never heard the shooter. There was no rifle crack from the hedgerow ahead. There was no machine gun stuttering from the next field. The rounds are coming from somewhere far behind the ridge, a place he cannot even see, and they are arriving with a flat, heavy snap that tears the air apart a foot above his helmet. He does not know it, but the gun killing his friends is sitting more than a mile away on the back of a vehicle he will never lay eyes on. That is the part that breaks a soldier. Not the weapon he can shoot back at, the weapon he cannot find. You have heard this gun called a lot of things. The Big 50, the Mar-Deuce, a war crime, by some people, which is a story we are going to come back to, because it is wrong, and the way it is wrong tells you something true. For now, hold on to one fact. German soldiers in 1944 and 45 learned to fear a single American gun more than almost anything else in the infantryman's day, and they feared it for a reason that had nothing to do with how loud it was or how it looked. This is not a story about a machine gun. It is a forensic audit of 2 decisions, an old cartridge and a habit of mounting it on everything, and why those 2 things kept German heads down from over a mile away. Let me show you the case. Start with the man whose name is on the gun. John Browning was the most important firearms designer America ever produced, and the gun in question did not begin with him at all. It began with a need on the battlefield in 1917 and 1918. The armored cars, the aircraft, and the hardened firing positions of modern war were shrugging off the standard rifle round. An officer of the American Expeditionary Force, General John Pershing, wanted an answer. He asked for a machine gun that fired a far heavier round, something that could punch through armor and reach up at aircraft. He set a rough bar for it. He wanted a bullet of about half an inch across, moving at no less than 2,700 feet per second. Browning did not start from a blank page. He took the machine gun he had already built, the 30 caliber design feeding the M1917, and he scaled the whole mechanism up to swallow a much larger cartridge. The round itself was the harder problem, and that work fell largely to Winchester. Across the front, the German army had fielded an anti-tank rifle that fired a 13mm round, and examples of that ammunition were captured and studied. The American cartridge that came out of that effort was, in plain terms, a 30 caliber rifle round grown to monstrous size. Winchester first put a rim on the case because they pictured it feeding an anti-tank rifle. Pershing insisted the case be rimless so it would belt feed cleanly through a machine gun, and rimless is how it stayed. The first gun was not ready in time. It fired its trials on the 15th of October 1918, less than a month before the war ended. And it was rough. It cycled at under 500 rounds a minute and pushed the bullet out at only about 2,300 feet per second, short of what Pershing had asked for. The army kept the project alive anyway, and the refinement took years. The water-cooled version, with a jacket of water around the barrel to soak up the heat of long bursts, was approved in 1921. Over the next decade, the gun lost that heavy water jacket and became air-cooled. And to keep the barrel from melting under sustained fire, the designers gave it a thick, heavy barrel that could store and shed heat on its own. That version, the heavy barrel model, became the standard, and it is the gun that went to war in 1944. Here is the receipt that should stop you. That design was approved more than 100 years ago, and the United States military still issues it today, not a museum piece. The same basic gun, on vehicles rolling out of motor pools right now. The water-cooled version did not disappear when the heavy barrel took over. It kept a niche that the air-cooled gun could never quite fill. With water wrapped around the barrel to carry off the heat, that older model could hold a long, sustained burst far longer before the barrel gave out, while the air-cooled gun had to fire in shorter strings or risk warping its barrel. So the water-cooled 50 caliber stayed in the fixed defensive role, bolted to anti-aircraft mounts guarding a bridge, a beachhead, or an airfield. The kind of position that might need to pour fire into the sky or down a road for minute after minute without a pause. Where a gun stood still and had to keep firing, the water jacket earned its weight. but the gun is only half the audit. The other half is the round. The cartridge Browning's team built it around is the one everybody knows by its nickname, the 50 cal, the 50 caliber BMG. To understand the fear in that beet field, you have to understand the size of this thing. A whole loaded cartridge weighs roughly 1 7/10 of an ounce. The bullet alone, the part that actually flies, runs about 660 grains in standard military ball, which is close to 10 times the weight of the bullet, leaving an ordinary rifle. Stand the two side by side and the rifle round looks like a toy. And the reason all that mass mattered is reach. There was more loaded into those belts than plain lead, and this is where the gun got its teeth. The 50 caliber fired several different kinds of round, and crews did not pick just one. There was the M2 armor piercing, built around a hardened steel core to bite through plate. There was the M8 armor piercing incendiary, which carried a charge that sparked on impact and set fuel and hot engines alight. There was the M1 and the M10 tracer, which burned a bright line through the air so a gunner could see where his fire was going and walk it onto the target. And there was plain ball for soft targets. The trick was that crews loaded these together into a single belt, alternating types. So one squeeze of the trigger sent a stream that could punch armor, set fuel burning, and mark the target, all at once. That mix is why a hit on a fuel drum, a light truck, or the engine deck of a vehicle so often ended in flame rather than just holes. The incendiary round did not need a lucky spark, it carried its own. A standard rifle bullet in that war ran out of useful energy fast. A 30 caliber rifle round left the muzzle carrying somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 foot-pounds of energy, and it bled that energy off quickly. A man with a rifle could threaten you out to a few hundred yards, and past that his rounds were falling and scattering and losing their punch. The 50 caliber did not do that. It left the muzzle of the ground gun at about 2,910 feet per second with standard ball, and it left carrying something on the order of 13,000 foot-pounds of energy, 4 or 5 times what a rifle put out. Mass plus velocity is what buys distance, and this round had both in abundance. The number that should sit with you is this. At 1,000 yards downrange, after all that flight, the 50 caliber round was still arriving with about 3,000 foot-pounds of energy, which is more than a full power rifle round delivers at the muzzle. The 50 caliber's leftovers at 1,000 yards were heavier than another gun's best shot at point blank. How far did that reach extend? The effective range against an area target, the distance where a trained crew could put fire onto men in the open and expect to hit, was about 1,800 yards. That is just over a mile. And the round did not simply stop there. The maximum range, the distance it could still reach and kill if it landed on someone, ran out past 7,000 yards. That is roughly 4 miles. Sit with what that does to a battlefield. A rifleman's whole world is the few hundred yards in front of him. Inside that bubble, it is a fair fight. His rifle against yours. The 50 caliber erased the bubble. It reached out past the edge of it, past the place where a man could even see a muzzle flash, and it killed inside ground the infantryman thought was safe. He could be hit by a shooter he had no way to shoot back at. That is the feeling in the beet field. That is the fear. Now, you might be thinking the Germans had nothing fast or fearsome of their own, and that is not true at all. They built 2 of the most respected machine guns of the war, the MG34 and then the MG42, a gun American troops nicknamed the buzzsaw for the sound it made. The MG42 was a marvel of rate of fire. It spat rounds at about 1,200 a minute, roughly twice the cyclic rate of the 50 caliber, a tearing cloth ripping sound that pinned men by sheer volume. But look closely at what it fired. It fired a 7.92mm rifle round, the same class of bullet a German rifleman carried in his bolt action, just fed through a belt very fast. It was a suppression tool, brilliant at flooding a stretch of ground with fire at close and medium range. It was not a reach weapon. It could not touch what the 50 caliber touched, and the bullet it sent did not carry the mass to punch through armor or a wall. The Germans had rate of fire. They had no equal to the 50 caliber's reach, and, as we are about to see, no equal to where the Americans were willing to bolt it. First, the weight problem. The gun was not light. The heavy barrel ground model weighed about 84 pounds on its own, And once you set it on the M3 tripod with the traversing and elevating mechanism that let a gunner walk his fire across a target with precision, the whole rig came to about 128 pounds. That is a heavy thing to move. A two-man job, sometimes more. If the .50 caliber had stayed a tripod weapon, hauled by tired gun crews, this would be a smaller story. It did not stay a tripod weapon. And this is the second decision, the one that turned a good gun into a thing that haunted the German army. The American habit was simple and almost stubborn. Put a .50 caliber on it, on nearly everything that moved. And the reason that was even possible comes down to one staggering number. American industry built roughly 2 million of these guns during the Second World War, turned out by Colt and Savage and the Saginaw division of General Motors, and a string of other plants. 2 million heavy machine guns is an almost unimaginable figure, and it is the whole reason the doctrine of mounting one on everything was not a dream, but a habit. When you have that many guns, you do not ration them to a few special units. You hang one wherever a bracket will hold it. Other armies treated a heavy machine gun as a special asset, a few per battalion, parceled out by a careful officer. The Americans bolted one onto the tank, where it rode on the turret as the commander's anti-aircraft gun, and then, far more often, got swung down to rake ground targets. They put it on trucks. They put it on jeeps. They built half-tracks around it. The reach we just measured, that mile and more, was not a rare thing waiting in one special unit. It was ordinary. It was sitting on the back of the next vehicle, up the road. Look closer at the tank, because the way American armor carried the gun became a signature of how it fought. On American tanks, the .50 caliber rode on a ring or a pintle mount right at the commander's hatch, up top, out in the open. To use it, the commander had to stand exposed above his own armor, head and shoulders in the air, and crews did it constantly anyway. They fired it at infantry caught in the open, at trucks, at the windows and doorways of buildings a sniper might be holding. It became so much a part of close fighting that the heavy machine gun at the commander's hatch is one of the things that set American tanks apart. Less a backup weapon than a tool the crew reached for every time the fighting got close and dirty. If you are wondering how that many guns ended up in one army, so was everyone on the other side. The clearest example rolled off the line at the White Motor Corporation. They built a half-track that carried not one .50 caliber, but 4 of them, set in pairs on each side of an open, electrically powered turret called the M45 Maxon mount. The turret could spin all the way around and elevate fast, tracking a target by motor instead of muscle. It was meant to shoot down low-flying aircraft. The crews called the mount a Quad 50. The vehicle was the M16, and it reached the front in early 1944 with thousands of these mounts produced across the war. But here is the detail the planners did not fully expect. By the time those quad guns reached Europe, Allied aircraft already owned the sky. There were not many German planes left to shoot at. So the crews lowered the 4 barrels and pointed them at the ground, at tree lines, at buildings, at any place enemy infantry might be hiding. 4 .50 caliber barrels firing together on a turret that could swing and walk that fire along a hedge do not just suppress a position, they take it apart. They could strip the leaves and branches off a tree line and chew through the wall a man was sheltering behind. The German soldiers who faced it gave it names. One was the Krautmauer, for the way it cut men down like a machine cutting a field. The other, the one that stuck in English, was the meat chopper. They were not naming a tool. They were naming what it did to the men caught in front of it. The ground was the main story, but the same round was reaching down from above it too. American fighters were built around batteries of this exact gun. The Thunderbolt carried 8 of them, 4 in each wing, and the Mustang carried 6. So the round that reached past a mile across a beet field was also the round tearing into trains, trucks, and parked aircraft from a diving fighter overhead. A German soldier moving along a road in 1944 faced the .50 caliber from the half-track beside him, and from the sky above him, the same bullet from 2 directions. Then the work came back to the ground, where it was decided. Think about what one of these guns, never mind 4, did on the ground across the campaigns of 1944 and 45. In the hedgerow country of Normandy, where the fighting was close and walled in by thick banks of earth and brush, the .50 caliber could reach across a field and hold an entire lane of advance shut. In the winter, fighting in the Ardennes, through the bitter cold from December 1944 into the new year, it tore into light vehicles and infantry pushing across open snow, and it sat trained on the roads so that any movement along a route became a gamble against a gun the traveller could not see. It suppressed infantry, pinning whole sections in place so they could not move or fire. It wrecked exposed positions, chewing through the cover men hid behind. It punched through light armor, through walls, through the thin and vulnerable points of vehicles. And it did all of that at ranges where the men on the receiving end could not reach back with their rifles. A weapon that hits you, and that you cannot hit, is not just dangerous. It changes how you fight. It makes you stay down when you should move. It wins ground without a single American having to walk forward. So far, this is an audit of why the gun worked. Now we have to deal with the myth, because if I leave it out, the whole thing is dishonest. And being honest is the only reason you should trust a word of this. Somewhere along the line, a rumor took hold. You have probably heard it, that it was illegal to fire the .50 caliber at an enemy soldier, that it was a war crime, banned by Geneva, and that American gunners were only allowed to shoot it at equipment, at trucks, and guns, and aircraft, never at men. It is not true. There was no rule in the Geneva Conventions, and no rule in the older Hague agreements that banned a .50 caliber machine gun from being fired at soldiers. The one old treaty people reach for, the Hague Declaration from 1899, bans bullets designed to expand and flatten inside the body, the kind that open up on impact. It says nothing about how big a bullet can be. A standard .50 caliber round fired at an enemy combatant was completely lawful in that war and after it. So where did the rumor come from? From a real habit, twisted over time into a fake law. American units often were told to save .50 caliber ammunition for vehicles and hard targets. Because the round was valuable, the gun was needed elsewhere, and there were lighter machine guns better suited to shooting at men. That was a supply decision and a tactical preference, not a law. Pass it through a few decades of soldiers retelling it, and a guideline about conserving ammo hardened into a story about a Geneva ban. The German infantryman in that beet field did not fear the .50 caliber because he thought it was against the rules. He feared it because it was brutally effective, and because it was everywhere, and those two things were very real. And that is the finding of the audit. The German army never fielded an equal to it. They had excellent machine guns, some of them, like the buzzsaw, faster firing than anything the Americans carried. What they did not have was this exact pairing. A heavy round that reached past a mile and still arrived with killing force, married to a doctrine that put it on nearly every vehicle in the army, so that the reach was not rare but ordinary, waiting at almost every turn in the road. One decision gave the gun its distance. The other decision gave it its numbers. Together they made a weapon a soldier could not see, could not answer, and could not get away from. The man in the field survived that afternoon. Many did not. And the gun that pinned him there, the one whose shooter he never saw, was not retired when the war ended. It was not replaced. It went on to Korea, to Vietnam, and it is still bolted to vehicles today, carried by armies all over the world. More than 100 years after John Browning's design was approved, the same .50 caliber is still reaching out past the mile, still doing the one thing it was built to do better than anything that has come along to take its place.